I'm Alec, 32 years old, and the forgotten middle child of what once was my family. When I was 16, my stepmother Caroline convinced my father Thomas that I should stay home while everyone else enjoyed our annual beach vacation. "It's better you stay behind and work," they said. Little did I know this wasn't just about missing a trip, it was the beginning of my systematic erasure from our family. Before I share how my family's betrayal changed my life forever, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own home. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. My story begins with a happy childhood that took a sharp turn when my mother died from breast cancer when I was 8 years old. For 2 years it was just my father Thomas, my older sister Sarah, who was 10 at the time, me and my baby brother Noah, who was barely 2. We were broken but still a family united by our shared grief and memories of Mom. Everything changed when my father met Caroline at his workplace Christmas party. She was recently divorced with 2 children of her own, Emma, who was 8, and Mason, who was 6. Within 6 months they were married, and we became what people call a blended family, though the blending was more like oil and water from the start. At first I tried to make it work. As the middle child, I'd always been the peacemaker, the one who could adapt. I welcomed Emma and Mason, showing them our neighborhood, including them in games, and defending them at school when other kids made comments about our unusual family setup. I thought if I could just love them enough, we would become the Brady Bunch family my father seemed to think we already were. But Caroline had different ideas about family dynamics. The changes were subtle at first, small privileges given to her biological children, while increasing demands were placed on me and my siblings. When Emma wanted the bigger bedroom that Sarah and I shared, Caroline convinced my father it made sense for us to move to the smaller rooms in the basement because teenagers need privacy anyway. When Mason broke my science fair project the night before judging, I was told to be mature and set an example rather than be upset. My father, so desperate to make his new marriage work, became blind to the imbalance. He'd been devastated by my mother's death and seemed to view Caroline as his salvation. Each time I tried to point out unfairness, he'd accuse me of being difficult or not trying hard enough to accept my new mother. Caroline wasn't my mother, and her constant comparison of me to my real mom, always unfavorable, made that abundantly clear. Despite the growing tensions at home, I thrived academically. School became my sanctuary, a place where effort and achievement were rewarded fairly. I joined every club I could, partly out of genuine interest, but also to minimize my time at home. By 14, I was taking advanced placement classes and working weekends at the local hardware store, saving every penny for the college fund my mother had started for me before she died. My relationship with my siblings was complicated. Sarah, 2 years older, was already looking toward escape, focusing on getting a scholarship to a college as far away as possible. She tried to shield me from the worst of Caroline's manipulations, but was fighting her own battles. My little brother Noah, too young to remember our mother, became the rope in a tug-of-war between Caroline's attempt to remake him as her own and my desperate efforts to keep our mother's memory alive for him. With my step-siblings, I maintained a careful neutrality. Emma, closest to me in age, occasionally showed moments of genuine sisterly affection, especially when Caroline wasn't watching. Mason, younger and more influenced by his mother's attitudes, alternated between seeking my approval and parroting Caroline's criticisms of me. Our home in suburban Detroit was comfortable but not luxurious. My father worked as a mid-level manager at an automotive supply company, steady work, but not enough to support a family of 7 without careful budgeting. This financial strain became another weapon in Caroline's arsenal, as she frequently reminded my father how much Alec's extracurriculars or Sarah's college visits were costing the family. By 16, I had mapped out my future with the precision of someone much older. I would graduate early, earn scholarships to study engineering at Michigan State, work through college, and build a career that would make my mother proud. What I hadn't accounted for was how thoroughly Caroline would work to undermine those plans, or how completely my father would surrender to her vision of our family, one that increasingly had no place for me. The summer of that fateful beach trip, tensions had been building for months. My father had promised to match my savings for a laptop I needed for school, then backtracked when Caroline mentioned how Mason needed braces. Sarah had left for college the previous fall, and without her buffer, Caroline's treatment of me had grown more openly hostile. Little comments about how I looked just like my mother, but didn't have her kindness, or how I was becoming difficult just like Sarah peppered daily conversations. I tried to maintain peace by making myself useful cooking dinners, when Caroline claimed to be too tired helping Noah, and even Mason with homework taking on extra shifts at work to contribute to household expenses. But no matter what I did, it was never enough to earn the same affection my father showered on Caroline's children, or even on Noah, who by then was firmly under Caroline's influence. The beach vacation had been a tradition in my mother's family for generations. Every summer, we would spend a week at a rented cottage on Lake Michigan, building sandcastles, swimming until sunset, and eating ice cream on the pier. After her death, my father had continued the tradition, and it remained the one time each year when I felt close to both my past and my family. Even after Caroline joined our family, those beach weeks remained sacred until that summer when everything changed. By the time I turned 16, the subtle inequalities in our household had hardened into unmistakable patterns. While Emma and Mason received new clothes at the start of each school year, I was told to make do with hand-me-downs from Sarah or discount store bargains, because you're growing so fast it's just not practical. When Mason wanted expensive soccer camps, my father found the money, but when I needed fees for academic competitions, I was told to fundraise or pay from my own savings. I had been working at Harding's Hardware since I was 14, starting with sweeping floors and stocking shelves before earning a promotion to cashier. By 16, I was working 20 hours each weekend, plus Wednesday and Thursday evenings. Every dollar I earned was split 3 ways: 1/3 for immediate expenses like school supplies and clothes, 1/3 for college savings, and 1/3 to contribute to household bills. Caroline's children had no such obligations. "You're teaching me responsibility," I once overheard Caroline tell my father when he questioned whether I was working too many hours. "Besides, he needs to understand that life isn't handed to you on a silver platter." The irony of this statement, given how much was handed to her children, was apparently lost on both of them. The most painful betrayal came when I discovered the truth about my college fund. My mother, knowing she was dying, had set aside $10,000 for each of us children. It wasn't enough for a full education, but it was her final gift meant to help us build our futures. When I turned 16 and began researching colleges in earnest, I asked my father about accessing those funds. His hesitation should have been my first clue. "We need to talk about that," he said, not meeting my eyes. "There have been some changes." Those changes turned out to be a complete depletion of my college fund. Caroline had convinced my father that Emma and Mason needed private school after incidents at the public school, incidents that mysteriously never required my father's direct involvement. The tuition had come from my mother's legacy to me. "We'll help you find scholarships," my father promised weakly. "And you can take out loans like most kids do. Emma and Mason needed this now, and your grades are so good you'll get financial aid anyway." I didn't explode as Sarah might have. Instead, I nodded, excused myself, and spent the next hour sitting in the park down the street staring at nothing. That evening, I called the hardware store and asked for more hours. My manager, Mr. Harding, a gruff but kind man, who had known my mother, didn't ask questions. He just added me to the schedule and pretended not to notice when I occasionally disappeared into the stockroom with red eyes. As Caroline solidified her position in our family, traditions began to change. Sunday dinners, once a time for sharing stories about our week, became showcases for Emma's singing or Mason's sports achievements. My accomplishments, like placing first in the regional science competition, received brief acknowledgement before the conversation shifted. Family movie nights now featured only films Emma and Mason enjoyed, while my suggestions were dismissed as too serious or boring. Family photos underwent a similar transformation. New pictures featuring Caroline, Emma, and Mason with my father and Noah began replacing the older ones that included my mother, Sarah, and me. By the time I was 16, the only visible evidence of my mother in our home was a single small photo in my room and another in Sarah's now vacant bedroom. The isolation I felt reached a peak at my 16th birthday. My mother had always made birthdays special with favorite meals, thoughtfully chosen gifts, and a day centered around the birthday child's preferences. Under Caroline's reign, my birthday dinner was scheduled on a night I had to work late because it was the only time that worked for everyone. When I arrived home, they had already eaten most of the meal, not my favorite foods but Mason's because we were ordering anyway. My father's gift was a generic gift card. Caroline and her children hadn't bothered with even that pretense. Later that night, I found Noah sitting on my bed waiting for me. At 10 years old, he was increasingly torn between the family alignment Caroline promoted and his natural affection for his biological siblings. He handed me a clumsily wrapped package, a framed photo of our mother holding me as a baby that he had rescued from a box in the basement. "I heard Caroline tell Dad they should put this stuff in storage," he whispered. "I don't remember Mom much, but I know you miss her." That small act of rebellion and connection nearly broke me. I hugged him fiercely, thanking him for the perfect gift. After he left, I carefully hid the photo, knowing instinctively that Caroline would find a way to remove it if discovered. The first major confrontation came shortly after my birthday. My father had promised to attend my academic awards ceremony, where I was receiving recognition for having the highest GPA in my class. The morning of the event, he informed me that he couldn't make it because Mason had a soccer game. "This is the third time you've chosen one of their events over mine," I said quietly, determined to remain calm. "That's not fair, Alec. We support all you kids equally." "Do you? When was the last time you missed one of Mason's games for something I was doing, or one of Emma's recitals?" His silence was answer enough. When he finally spoke, his words revealed how completely Caroline had rewritten our family narrative. "You've always been so independent, Alec. Mason and Emma need more encouragement. They're not naturally confident like you." The absurdity of this statement, attributing my self-reliance born of necessity to some innate trait that justified their neglect, left me speechless. I went to the ceremony alone, received my award to applause from strangers, and returned home to find no one had even asked how it went. That night, I discovered another disturbing development. Looking through our family photo album to find a picture of my mother for a school project, I noticed something odd about the recent family photos. In group shots where I had stood at the edge of the frame, the photos had been cropped to remove me entirely. In others, I was positioned so far in the background that a casual observer would never identify me as part of the family. This deliberate erasure was so methodical it couldn't be accidental. Caroline was literally cutting me out of the family narrative, and my father was either complicit or oblivious. The realization settled in my stomach like a stone. I was being systematically removed from my own family story. As July approached, I began looking forward to our annual beach vacation with a desperation that should have warned me something was wrong. The previous months had been a steady drumbeat of small exclusions and larger betrayals, and I viewed the trip as perhaps my last chance to reconnect with my father and siblings away from Caroline's constant manipulation. The Lake Michigan cottage had been booked months in advance, the same one we'd rented since I was a child. I had saved up to buy a new fishing rod for Noah, something our mother had done for me at his age. I planned to wake early each morning to watch the sunrise over the water just as I had with my mother. For 1 week, I thought we could remember who we had been before Caroline. 2 weeks before the scheduled departure, I came home from work to find the family gathered in the living room, suitcases already being packed far earlier than usual. My father and Caroline exchanged glances before he cleared his throat. "Alec, we need to talk about the beach trip," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mr. Harding mentioned they're short-staffed this month, and Caroline and I think it would be responsible for you to stay behind and pick up extra shifts." The practiced way he delivered this speech told me it had been rehearsed. This wasn't a sudden decision. "I already arranged time off," I said, confusion giving way to a sinking feeling. "Mr. Harding approved it months ago." Caroline interjected smoothly. "That was before 2 of his employees quit. He mentioned to me when I was in the store last week how helpful it would be if you could cover. I took the liberty of telling him you'd be happy to help." I looked to my father, waiting for him to recognize this for the manipulation it was. Instead, he nodded approvingly. "It shows great maturity, son, and the extra money will help with your college fund." The college fund that had already been emptied for Emma and Mason's private school tuition. The irony wasn't lost on me. "We're still going to the same cottage?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "I could come for the weekend, maybe after my shift on Saturday." Another exchanged glance between them. Actually, Caroline said, with artificial brightness, we decided to try somewhere new this year. A friend of mine offered us her beach house in Traverse City. It's smaller than the cottage, just 3 bedrooms, so this works out perfectly. 3 bedrooms. One for my father and Caroline, one for Emma, and Mason, one for Noah. No space for me, even if I could make it for part of the trip. This had never been about work. It was about excluding me entirely. Noah, who had been quietly listening, piped up. But Alec always comes to the beach. He teaches me to fish and helps me build sandcastles. Caroline's smile tightened. You're getting too old for sandcastles, sweetie. And Mason can teach you to play beach volleyball. Instead, it's much more fun than fishing. The systematic replacement of my role in Noah's life couldn't have been clearer. I looked at Emma, wondering if she felt any discomfort with this situation. She studied her fingernails, avoiding my gaze. The morning they left, I stood in the driveway watching them load the minivan. Noah hugged me tightly, slipping a small shell into my hand. "So, you have a piece of the beach," he whispered. Emma gave me an awkward half-wave. Mason didn't acknowledge me at all. My father promised vaguely to make it up to me somehow, while Caroline efficiently directed the packing, visibly anxious to get on the road. As they pulled away, I noticed something that cemented the reality of my situation. The luggage rack on top of the van was completely full. They had packed as if they were still bringing a 7th person. There had never been a space issue. They simply didn't want me there. The house felt cavernous that first night. I heated a frozen dinner and ate alone at the kitchen table, trying not to look at the empty chairs. I called Mr. Harding, who sounded confused when I offered to work extra shifts. "I didn't ask for extra coverage," he said. "Your stepmother mentioned you might want more hours in August, but I told her the schedule was already set for July." Another lie exposed. I thanked him and hung up unsurprised, but still wounded by the confirmation. The next day I went to work as scheduled, throwing myself into tasks with an intensity that had Mr. Harding watching me with concern. When I got home, I wandered through the empty house, noting how many family photos had already been altered to minimize or eliminate my presence. In the living room, the wall of vacation photos from previous years had been rearranged with several missing, entirely the ones where I had been centered in the frame. On the second night of their trip, Sarah called me from college. She had tried reaching Dad and gotten no answer, then tried the cottage's landline, only to learn from the owner that the family hadn't rented it this year. Concerned, she had called me. "They went to Traverse City instead," I explained, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Caroline's friend offered them a beach house. And you didn't go." The surprise in her voice was validating. She also found this strange. "Apparently there wasn't room for me," I said. "And they said Mr. Harding needed me to work extra shifts." Sarah was silent for a moment. "That's bullshit, Alec. Dad would never have excluded one of us from the beach trip when Mom was alive." "Dad's not the same person anymore," I said quietly. "No, he's not." Her voice hardened. "Listen, I've been talking to Grandma and Grandpa Miller, our mother's parents, who had become increasingly distant after Caroline entered the picture. They've been trying to stay in contact with us, but Caroline has been blocking them, telling them you kids are busy or making excuses why they can't visit. This revelation shouldn't have shocked me, but it did. Our grandparents had been such an important part of our lives before Caroline. They had seemingly withdrawn after our mother died, and I had attributed it to their grief. Learning they had been actively kept away added another layer to Caroline's systematic dismantling of our family connections. The next day I received a text from Noah sent from Emma's phone. "Miss you. Mom C says we can't call you because it would make you sad about missing the trip. But I wanted you to see the sandcastle I made." Attached was a photo of a modest sand structure with a moat. In the background I could see my father and Mason playing volleyball, Caroline sunbathing, and Emma taking the picture. They looked like a perfect family of 5, a family that didn't include me or Sarah. Later that evening, Emma called, sounding nervous. "I'm supposed to be getting ice cream," she said hurriedly. "Alec, I need to tell you something. This trip wasn't last minute. Mom's been planning it for months. She told the Millers a different week so they wouldn't run into us. And," she hesitated, "she's been talking to Dad about having you move into an apartment when school starts this fall. She says you're old enough to be independent. My 16th birthday had been just 2 months earlier. The legal age to live independently was 18. This wasn't about independence, it was about elimination. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because it's not right, she whispered. And because. Another pause. I found Mom going through your room before we left. She was putting things in boxes. The call ended abruptly with muffled voices in the background. I sat in the darkening house pieces falling into place. This vacation wasn't just about excluding me from a family tradition. It was the cover for something more permanent. My stomach clenched as I realized what might be happening in my absence. The day of their return, I deliberately arrived home late, having picked up an extra shift at work, more to avoid the awkward homecoming than for the additional pay. When I finally walked through the door, the house had that peculiar tension of people trying too hard to act normal. Noah ran to hug me, but was quickly called away by Caroline to unpack his things. My father gave me a distracted greeting before disappearing into his office. Emma wouldn't meet my eyes, and Mason smirked in a way that sent warning signals through my body. "How was work?" Caroline asked with artificial brightness. "We missed you at the beach." The lie was so transparent I didn't bother acknowledging it. "I'm going to shower and head to bed," I said, turning toward the stairs. "Oh, Caroline called after me, her voice honey-sweet with underlying satisfaction. "We had to do some rearranging while you were gone. Don't be shocked." The warning, delivered as if she were doing me a favor, only heightened my dread as I climbed the stairs to my bedroom. The door was closed, which was unusual. I always left it open when I wasn't home. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle and stepped inside. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The room was still my room in terms of dimensions and window placement, but everything else had changed. My bed with its familiar blue comforter was gone, replaced by a generic-looking futon with neutral bedding. My desk, where I'd spent countless hours studying, had vanished, along with my bookshelf and the books I'd collected over years. The walls, once covered with academic achievement, certificates, scientific posters, and photos of me with friends and family, were now bare except for bland landscape prints that matched the new beige curtains. I stood frozen in the doorway, trying to comprehend the transformation. My room had been converted into what looked like a hotel room, impersonal, uninviting, and devoid of any evidence that I had ever lived there. Slowly, I began opening drawers and closets, hoping to find my possessions merely rearranged. The drawers contained neatly folded towels and extra blankets. The closet held a vacuum cleaner and storage boxes. Not a single item of my clothing, not one of my books, not a trace of my existence remained. In a daze, I walked back downstairs. Caroline was in the kitchen unpacking groceries, as if nothing unusual had happened. My father was still nowhere to be seen. "Where are my things?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "In the basement," Caroline replied without looking up. "We've been meaning to convert that room into a proper guest room for ages, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. Your father agreed it makes more sense for you to use the basement bedroom now that you're older. More privacy." The basement had 2 small rooms, one that had been Sarah's until she left for college, and another that had been used for storage. Neither had proper windows or adequate heating in winter. "You moved everything without asking me, without even telling me." "Don't be dramatic, Alec. It's still your home. We just needed to make better use of the space." Her tone suggested I was being unreasonable for questioning the complete erasure of my personal space. I turned away from her and walked to the living room, where another shock awaited me. The wall of family photos had been completely rearranged. Every single picture that had included me was gone. New photos from the recent beach trip had already been framed and displayed prominently. A perfect family of 5, enjoying their vacation. In older photos where I couldn't be completely removed, I had been cropped out, leaving awkward compositions that no one would question unless they knew to look for the missing piece. With growing horror, I moved through the house, discovering the systematic removal of my presence. The refrigerator door, once partially covered with school awards and childhood artwork, now displayed only Noah, Emma, and Mason's achievements. The family calendar in the kitchen no longer listed my work schedule or school events. Even the laundry room bulletin board where we tracked chores had been updated to remove my name from the rotation. I descended to the basement, flipping on lights as I went. Sarah's old room was untouched, preserved as if she might return any day, a courtesy not extended to me. The storage room door was ajar, and inside I found cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly, labeled in Caroline's precise handwriting: Alec, books Alec, clothes Alec, school. As I began opening boxes to assess what had been kept and what had been discarded, I discovered another disturbing detail. My family photos, the ones that had been removed from frames around the house, had been altered. In some, my image had been literally cut out with scissors. In others, I had been covered with marker or scribbled over. These defaced photos had been carelessly tossed into a box labeled Alec, Misk. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced my father's arrival. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, unable to meet my eyes. "Your stepmother thought it would be better to make these changes while you were occupied," he said, as if that explained or excused anything. "The guest room has been on our to-do list for a while." And erasing me from every family photo, was that on the to-do list too? I held up one of the defaced pictures where my face had been methodically scratched out with what looked like a knife point. He blanched. "I didn't know about that. That's not, I'm sure Caroline didn't." "Stop lying, Dad. Stop pretending this is normal." My voice remained steady, even as I felt my world collapsing. "What's really going on here?" He sighed heavily, suddenly looking old and defeated. "Caroline thinks it would be best if you started thinking about more independent living arrangements. You're almost 17. You have a job, you're responsible." "I'm 16, I corrected him. "My birthday was 2 months ago. Or have you forgotten that too?" "17 soon," he amended weakly. "And you've always been mature for your age. Caroline thinks." "I don't care what Caroline thinks." The first crack in my composure. "What do you think, Dad? Do you think it's appropriate to throw your 16-year-old son out of his home, to erase him from family photos, to pretend he doesn't exist?" He had no answer. As I waited for him to defend me, to show some sign of the father he had once been, I heard Caroline calling him from upstairs. Without another word, he turned and climbed the stairs, leaving me alone among the boxed remains of my existence. Later that night, I overheard them arguing in their bedroom. Through the heating vent that connected to the basement, their voices carried clearly. "This is going too far," my father was saying. "He's still my son. You can't just erase him." "I'm not erasing him," Caroline responded, her voice sharp with irritation. "I'm helping him become independent, which is more than you've done. He's not a child anymore, Thomas. And having him here is causing tension with Mason and Emma. Even Noah is confused about loyalties. He's 16 years old. We can't legally." "We're not abandoning him," she interrupted. "We're transitioning him to adulthood. The basement is a perfect starter apartment. He has the bathroom down there. We can set up a mini fridge and microwave. It's what Sarah would have had if she hadn't run off to college." "Sarah was 18 when she left, and she chose to go," my father protested weakly. "And Alec can choose to stay in the basement apartment or find his own place. He's working, he's smart, he'll figure it out. Honestly, Thomas, I'm doing this for his own good. He needs to stop depending on you for everything." The irony of this statement, when I had been largely self-sufficient for years while her children received constant support, was breathtaking. But what hurt more was my father's response. "Fine," he sighed. "We'll try it your way, but I'm not forcing him out if he wants to stay." "Of course not," Caroline soothed, her victory secured. "We're just giving him options." As their voices faded into murmurs, I sat on the floor among the boxes of my dismantled life, a cold clarity settling over me. This wasn't about a guest room or helping me become independent. This was the culmination of years of Caroline's campaign to remove any reminder of my mother from our family, and as the child who most resembled her, I had become the primary target. That night alone in the unfamiliar basement room surrounded by boxes of my possessions, I experienced what I can only describe as a complete emotional collapse. For years I had maintained a careful composure, believing that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, or helped enough, I could secure my place in my own family. Now the physical evidence of my expendability was stacked around me in cardboard boxes, My identity literally cut out of family photos. I allowed myself one night of total grief. I cried for the mother I had lost, for the father who had chosen a new family over his children, for the siblings who were being taught to forget me, and for the childhood that had been stolen piece by piece. I cried until my throat was raw, and my eyes swollen, muffling the sounds in a pillow so no one upstairs would hear the breakdown I could no longer contain. Morning brought a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes when you've hit bottom and realize there's nowhere to go but up. I showered in the basement bathroom, dressed in clothes retrieved from boxes, and emerged upstairs to find Noah waiting for me at the kitchen table, his eyes wide and worried. "Are you leaving us?" he asked as soon as we were alone. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "Caroline told Dad you want your own apartment because you think you're too good for us now." His voice trembled. "She said that's why you didn't come to the beach." The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it weren't so effective. "Noah, you know that's not true. They told me to stay behind, remember? You were there when they said it." He nodded slowly. "I know. But Dad says sometimes we remember things differently when we're upset." Caroline was gaslighting my 10-year-old brother, rewriting events he had witnessed himself. The realization sparked something beyond hurt, a genuine anger that had been building for years. "Noah, listen to me. I love you. I have always loved you. Nothing Caroline says can change that. But she's telling you things that aren't true, and I think you know that." His eyes filled with tears. "She threw away the shell I gave you. I saw it in the trash when we got home. That small cruelty, disposing of a child's gift to his brother, crystallized everything. Caroline wasn't just trying to remove me from the family. She was actively trying to sever the bonds between siblings, to isolate me completely." Later that morning, Sarah arrived unexpectedly. She had driven 5 hours from college after my late-night text, describing what had happened. Caroline was visibly displeased by her appearance, but maintained a thin veneer of politeness as Sarah announced she was taking me out for breakfast. At the diner, safely away from home, Sarah and I compared notes. The picture that emerged was more calculated than I had imagined. Sarah had been systematically isolated first. Caroline had intercepted mail from our grandparents, forgotten to tell our father about Sarah's calls, and convinced him that Sarah's decision to attend college out of state was a rejection of the family rather than the academic opportunity it was. "She's been working on Dad for years," Sarah said, "telling him that we resent him for remarrying, that we're trying to undermine his relationship with Noah, that we're disrespectful to her. None of it's true, but he believes her because it's easier than admitting he's chosen her over us." When we returned home, my father was waiting in the living room, his expression a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. Caroline sat beside him, a united front. Emma hovered in the doorway while Mason lounged on the stairs, openly curious about the coming confrontation. Noah was nowhere to be seen. "We need to talk about your living situation," my father began. "You mean my eviction?" I countered, the anger I'd suppressed for years finally finding its voice. "Let's be clear about what's happening here." Caroline interjected smoothly. "No one is evicting you, Alec. We're simply acknowledging that you're growing up and need more independence. The basement apartment—" "Is not an apartment," Sarah interrupted. "It's a storage room with no windows and a bed, and he's 16 years old. This isn't about independence. It's about erasing him." My father shifted uncomfortably. "No one is erasing anyone. This is still Alec's home." Really, I walked to the photo wall, gesturing at the carefully curated display that now showed no evidence of my existence. Then why am I not in a single family photo? Why has my room been converted to a guest room? Why have my chores been reassigned, my achievements removed from the refrigerator, and my name crossed off the family calendar? My father looked genuinely confused, turning to Caroline. "What is he talking about?" In that moment, I realized my father wasn't fully complicit. He was oblivious to the extent of Caroline's campaign against me. She had made these changes, incrementally normalizing each small erasure, until the complete removal of my presence seemed unremarkable to him. "Show him," I said to Sarah, who pulled out her phone and began displaying photos she had taken earlier, side-by-side comparisons of family pictures from before Caroline and now documentation of the defaced photos in the basement. Images of my stripped room. As my father scrolled through the evidence, his face paled. Caroline. His voice held a question she clearly didn't want to answer. Thomas, you're overreacting. I was just updating things, making the house more cohesive. Alec doesn't even like having his picture taken. I was respecting his privacy. The lie was so bold it momentarily stunned us all into silence. Then Mason, perhaps sensing his mother's predicament, jumped in with the cruelest revelation yet. Mom said we're redecorating because Alec's moving out for good, he announced with undisguised satisfaction. She already called the storage company about donating his old stuff. Emma gasped from the doorway, evidently unaware of this development. My father turned to Caroline, confusion, giving way to the first real anger I had seen from him in years. Is this true? Are you planning to give away his possessions? Caroline's composure finally cracked. He doesn't need all that childish junk. He's practically an adult, and he takes up so much space in this house, space we need for our real family. The words hung in the air, a truth finally spoken aloud that could not be retracted. Our real family. Not including me or Sarah. Perhaps not even including Noah, except as a convert to Caroline's vision. I think my father said slowly that you and I need to have a private conversation. He stood gesturing for Caroline to follow him to their bedroom. As they left, Mason scowled at me. Way to go, crybaby. You just had to make a scene. Emma remained silent, her expression torn between guilt and relief that the truth was finally emerging. From upstairs came the sound of raised voices, my father's questioning, Caroline's defensive. Sarah put her arm around me. Whatever happens with them, she said quietly, you're coming home with me. My roommate moved out last month. The apartment's small, but it's safe, and it's far away from here. For the first time in years, I felt the relief of having someone firmly on my side, someone who saw what was happening and refused to let it continue. The emotion was so overwhelming I couldn't speak, could only nod and lean into her strength. Later that evening, after hours of heated discussion between my father and Caroline, he called me into his office. His eyes were red-rimmed, his posture defeated. I didn't see what was happening, he began. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. Caroline has. She's been methodically erasing me from this family I finished for him, for years. He nodded, unable to deny the truth any longer. I failed you. And Sarah. I've been so afraid of being alone, of failing at another marriage, that I let Caroline manipulate me into betraying my own children. He looked up, finally meeting my eyes directly. I can't undo what's been done, but I can stop it from continuing. I've told Caroline that her behavior is unacceptable. We're going to family counseling, and your room will be restored immediately. It should have been the resolution I had longed for, my father finally seeing the truth, standing up for me, choosing his children over Caroline's manipulation. But as I looked at him, I realized it was too late. The damage wasn't just in the removed photos or the boxed possessions. It was in the years of small betrayals that had accumulated into an unbridgeable chasm of broken trust. I'm going to stay with Sarah, I said quietly. At least for a while. He didn't argue, perhaps understanding that he had lost the right to decide what was best for me. What about Noah? I'll call him visit when I can. But I can't stay here, Dad. Not anymore. As I left his office, I found Caroline waiting in the hallway, her expression a mixture of thwarted rage and calculation. This isn't over, she said softly, meant for my ears alone. This is still my house, and Thomas will eventually see reason. I looked at her directly, no longer the intimidated child she had systematically undermined for years. Take all the photos down. Throw away everything I ever touched. Turn my room into a shrine to your perfect family. It won't change the truth. What truth? She sneered. That you're so threatened by the memory of a dead woman that you tried to erase her children. That's not strength, Caroline. That's weakness. And my father finally sees it. For the first time since she had entered our lives, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. The first crack in her absolute confidence that she could control our family narrative. I walked away knowing that whatever happened next between my father and Caroline, I had finally reclaimed my own story. The systematic erasure had failed. I was still here, still myself, and no amount of removed photos or packed boxes could change that essential truth. The week after the confrontation was a blur of practical decisions and emotional reckonings. Sarah extended her summer sublet to accommodate me, and I arranged to transfer my job to a hardware store branch near her college town. Mr. Harding not only approved the transfer but wrote me a glowing recommendation, adding I always knew something wasn't right in that house. Before leaving, I methodically documented everything, my financial contributions to the household over the years. The depletion of my college fund, the defaced photos, the converted bedroom. Sarah suggested this record-keeping not for legal action, but for our own clarity to combat the gaslighting we had both experienced, the constant questioning of our memories and perceptions. I also reached out to our maternal grandparents, the Millers, who were shocked to learn how thoroughly they had been cut out of our lives. Caroline had told them we were too busy for visits, that we found their reminders of our mother painful, that we had chosen to move on with our new family. All lies designed to isolate us from the people who would have recognized and challenged the psychological manipulation taking place. We tried for years to stay connected, my grandmother said during our tearful phone call. Your father told us you kids didn't want to see us because it was too painful after your mother died. We never believed it, but we didn't want to force ourselves into your lives if it would cause more hurt. The Millers immediately offered financial and emotional support. They had set aside money for our education that Caroline couldn't access, and they opened their home to us whenever we needed a safe place. Most importantly, they validated our experiences, confirming that what we had endured wasn't normal or acceptable. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Noah. At 10 years old, he was caught between loyalty to the family unit he saw every day and his love for the siblings who were leaving. I promised to call him weekly, to visit when possible, and to always be his brother regardless of distance. Caroline says you hate us now, he confided as we sat on the front steps the evening before my departure. Caroline says a lot of things that aren't true, I replied carefully. I don't hate anyone, especially not you. But sometimes people need to leave situations that are hurting them. Is that why Mom left? Because Dad was hurting her? His innocent question revealed how thoroughly Caroline had rewritten even our mother's death, transforming her cancer into an abandonment narrative. No, Noah. Mom didn't leave by choice. She was very sick with cancer, and she fought hard to stay with us because she loved us more than anything. She never wanted to leave you. His eyes widened. Caroline said Mom left because she wasn't happy with us. The cruelty of this lie, telling a child his mother had abandoned him rather than died loving him, solidified my resolve to maintain a connection with Noah despite the distance. He deserved to know the truth about our mother, about our family before Caroline, about his own history. The day I moved out, my father helped load my boxes into Sarah's car, his movements mechanical, his expression haunted. He had aged years in the week since the confrontation, the weight of his complicity in my erasure finally settling on his shoulders. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said as we stood by the loaded car. But I want you to know, I'm getting help. Real help, not just the family counseling. I let my fear of being alone blind me to what was happening to you and Sarah. I failed as a father. Yes, you did. I agreed not to be cruel, but because pretending otherwise would only continue the patterns of denial that had brought us here. But you can still be a father to Noah. You can still protect him from Caroline's manipulation. That's what I'm asking you to do now. He nodded solemnly. I will, and I'll be here if you ever want to come home. This isn't home anymore, I said gently, but maybe someday we can build something new. It was the most honest conversation we had had in years, perhaps ever. As Sarah and I drove away, I watched my childhood home recede in the side mirror, feeling both grief and liberation in equal measure. Life with Sarah was an adjustment. Her one-bedroom apartment was cramped with 2 people, but the freedom from constant psychological warfare made the physical constraints insignificant. We established new routines, divided chores fairly, and supported each other through nightmares and moments of doubt. The hardware store job paid less than my position with Mr. Harding, but I supplemented it with weekend work at a campus coffee shop. Every dollar went into a dedicated account for my education, one that no one else could access. The Millers helped with emergency expenses, and invited us for holidays, gradually rebuilding the extended family connections that Caroline had severed. My high school allowed me to complete my junior year remotely, sending assignments electronically and proctoring exams through the local community college. Despite the disruption, I maintained my GPA and even accelerated some courses, determined to graduate early and begin college on my own terms. The most unexpected development came 3 months after I left when Emma contacted me through social media. Her message was brief. "Mason broke my phone, so Caroline couldn't see I'm talking to you. Things are worse here. Dad moved into the guest room. Caroline's telling Noah you abandoned him like Mom did. Can I call you?" Our subsequent conversation revealed that my departure had not led to the family harmony Caroline had predicted. Instead, without me as the designated scapegoat, the dysfunction had found new targets. My father's awakening to Caroline's manipulation had created an ongoing conflict that was affecting everyone in the household. "Dad wants a divorce," Emma confided, "but Caroline says she'll take Noah if he tries to leave her." Though I had no legal standing to intervene, I maintained contact with Emma, offering support and perspective as she navigated the increasingly toxic household. Eventually, she began spending weekends with Sarah and me, finding in our tiny apartment the acceptance and stability lacking in her own home. A year after I left, my father finally filed for divorce. The legal process was messy and protracted, with Caroline fighting for full custody of Noah and making false allegations about my father's parenting. The documentation Sarah and I had gathered became crucial evidence demonstrating Caroline's pattern of manipulation and emotional abuse. In the end, the court awarded my father primary custody of Noah, with Caroline receiving supervised visitation after a court-appointed psychologist identified concerning patterns in her behavior. Emma chose to live with her father and Noah, while Mason elected to stay with Caroline, his mother's primary ally and enabler. By the time I graduated high school a year early as planned, I had established a new life independent of the family trauma. The Millers attended my small graduation ceremony, along with Sarah, Emma, Noah, and my father. Caroline and Mason were conspicuously absent, having constructed their own narrative in which I was the villain who had destroyed their perfect family. The scholarship offers came in that spring, not as many as I might have received without the disruption, but enough to provide options. I chose a university 3 hours from Sarah's, close enough for regular visits, but far enough to establish my own identity, separate from the experiences that had defined my adolescence. On my 18th birthday, my father handed me an envelope containing the deed to a small trust fund my mother had established for each of us children. Caroline had never known about this account, which had been managed by my mother's attorney with instructions to release it when we turned 18. It wasn't a fortune, but it represented my mother's enduring care and foresight, her determination to provide for us even after her death. "She would be proud of you, my father," said his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown more strength and integrity than I ever did." "I had a good example," I replied. "For 8 years I had the best." It wasn't complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement of our shared loss and the possibility of a new relationship built on truth rather than denial. The road ahead would be complex, with setbacks and disappointments, alongside moments of connection, but at least now we were walking in the light of honesty rather than the shadows of manipulation. 5 years after the summer when my family tried to erase me, I stood in my own living room, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and the pieces of family I had reclaimed. At 21, I had completed my engineering degree a semester early and secured a position with a renewable energy firm in Chicago. The apartment was small but entirely mine, the first space I had ever inhabited that couldn't be taken away or transformed in my absence. Sarah, now 23, and in her first year of law school, had brought her fiancé Mark to help celebrate my graduation and job offer. Emma, 19 and studying psychology at a state university, had driven in with Noah, who at 15 already stood taller than any of us. Even my father had made the trip, staying at a nearby hotel and making careful efforts to respect the boundaries I had established in our gradually healing relationship. "I never doubted you would succeed," Sarah said as we stood by the window overlooking the city lights. "Even when everything was falling apart, you kept building toward your future." "I had help," I acknowledged. From you, from the Millers, from people who saw me when Caroline was trying to make me invisible. The journey to this moment had been neither simple nor straightforward. After leaving home, I had struggled with trust issues, anxiety, and the lingering effects of years of gaslighting and emotional manipulation. Therapy became an essential part of my healing process, helping me untangle the distorted thinking patterns that Caroline had cultivated. "You're not responsible for other people's cruelty," my therapist had repeated in our early sessions. "And you don't have to earn the right to exist in your own life." These simple truths had been revolutionary to someone raised to believe that family inclusion was conditional on perfect compliance and self-erasure. Gradually, I learned to set healthy boundaries, to trust my own perceptions, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or fear. My relationship with my father evolved slowly through cautious phone calls, occasional visits, and eventually honest conversations about the past. He had remained in therapy after the divorce, working to understand how his fear of abandonment had led him to enable Caroline's abuse. "I thought keeping my marriage intact at any cost was the responsible thing to do," he confessed during one of our conversations. "I didn't realize I was sacrificing my children to preserve a relationship that was fundamentally unhealthy." Noah had perhaps the most difficult adjustment after the divorce. Having been told conflicting narratives about his family history, he struggled to discern truth from manipulation. When he was 12, he asked me directly about our mother, about Caroline's role in our family breakdown, about why I had left. I told him the truth, in age-appropriate terms supported by photos, letters, and memories that Caroline hadn't managed to destroy. The Millers shared stories about our mother helping Noah connect with the parent he had been too young to remember. Gradually, he developed a more accurate understanding of his own history and the dynamics that had shaped our family. Emma's journey surprised us all. After witnessing Caroline's escalating behavior during the divorce, she began critically examining the manipulation she had both experienced and sometimes participated in. Her decision to study psychology stemmed directly from this awareness, her desire to understand and prevent the kind of emotional abuse she had observed. "I used to think you were the problem," she admitted during a visit in my sophomore year of college. "Caroline was so convincing, always casting you as the ungrateful, difficult one. It wasn't until you were gone, and she needed a new target, that I realized the pattern had nothing to do with you specifically." Mason remained firmly aligned with Caroline, rebuffing all attempts at contact from his father or siblings. According to Emma's occasional updates, they had constructed an alternate reality in which they were the victims of a family conspiracy, their rightful place usurped by the lingering ghost of my mother and her children. "You can't save everyone," my therapist reminded me when I expressed guilt about Mason's isolation. "Some people choose their narratives despite all evidence, and that's not your responsibility to fix." This lesson, learning to release responsibility for others' choices while maintaining compassion for their struggles, became central to my healing. I could acknowledge Caroline's likely unresolved trauma without excusing her actions. I could wish Mason well without accepting his hostility. I could forgive my father's failures without pretending they hadn't caused real harm. My grandparents, the Millers, became an unexpected source of stability and connection to my mother's legacy. Through them, I learned family stories I had never heard, saw photos Caroline had destroyed, and developed a more complete understanding of the woman whose death had set our family tragedy in motion. "Your mother wasn't perfect," my grandmother told me, "but she loved fiercely and completely. She would have moved heaven and earth to protect you children." In a way, she did, setting up those trust funds, writing those letters for your 18th birthdays, making sure you would have resources beyond your father's control. These concrete expressions of my mother's love and foresight became touchstones during difficult periods. When anxiety threatened to overwhelm me, when old doubts about my worth resurfaced, I would remember that she had seen me clearly enough to prepare for my future, even when facing her own mortality. The most profound healing came through building my own chosen family, friends, mentors, and eventually colleagues, who valued me for exactly who I was, without conditions or manipulation. My roommate Justin became the brother I had always wanted, accepting my occasional nightmares and anxiety without judgment. My study group evolved into a tight-knit circle whose holiday gatherings became more meaningful than any family tradition Caroline had erased. In my professional life, I found unexpected purpose in designing sustainable housing solutions, creating spaces that were both environmentally responsible and psychologically nurturing. My personal experience of having my physical space violated gave me unique insight into how environments affect emotional well-being, an awareness that informed my design philosophy and eventually became my professional signature. Standing in my apartment on that celebration night, surrounded by people who had chosen to be part of my journey, I realized that Caroline had ultimately failed in her campaign to erase me. By attempting to remove me from the family narrative, she had instead freed me to write my own story, one based on authentic connections rather than obligation on mutual support, rather than manipulation on truth, rather than comfortable. Danielle. To Alex, Sarah raised her glass in a toast, who taught us all that family is defined by love and choice, not by who tries to erase you from the photos. As laughter and agreement rippled through the room, I felt the final pieces of my healing click into place. The painful beach trip, the stripped room, the defaced photos, these would always be part of my history. But they were chapters in a longer story, not its conclusion. The true ending was still being written day by day, choice by choice, in the life I had reclaimed and the connections I continued to nurture. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, Noah approached me with a small wrapped package. "I found this in the attic last month," he said. "Dad didn't know it existed." Inside was a letter from our mother, dated a week before her death, addressed to me on my future graduation day. Somehow it had survived Caroline's purge, hidden away where even my father had forgotten its existence. "My darling Alec," it began, "if you're reading this, you've accomplished something wonderful, and I'm only sorry I couldn't be there to celebrate with you in person. Know that I see you, your kindness, your determination, your quiet strength. The world will try to tell you who you are, but you already know. Trust that knowledge. It will never lead you astray." Those words, "I see you," from a mother who had been gone for nearly 15 years, provided the perfect counterpoint to Caroline's attempts at erasure. Even from beyond death, my mother had managed to witness me, to acknowledge my existence and worth in a way my stepmother had tried so desperately to deny. I share this story now, not to dwell on past hurts, but to reach anyone who has experienced the particular pain of being erased within their own family. Your story matters. Your existence matters. The people who try to minimize or erase you do so from their own woundedness, not because you are unworthy of being seen. The family photo wall in my apartment now holds images from every chapter of my life. Pictures with my mother, with Sarah and Noah, with my grandparents, with the friends who became chosen family with my father as we carefully rebuild our calmer relationship. There are gaps in the chronology periods when Caroline's influence meant no photos were taken or preserved. But these gaps are part of the honest record evidence of a struggle overcome, rather than a successful erasure. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? How did you reclaim your story? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you found meaning in my journey, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be seen exactly as they are. Thank you for witnessing my story. In doing so, you've helped ensure that those who tried to erase me have ultimately failed. Remember, your worth isn't determined by those who try to diminish you, but by your courage to remain authentically yourself despite their efforts.